We are live.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this conversation um, about EGAP. I'm going to wait for about 1 minute until people are able to all show up. I can see everybody joins right at the top of the hour. Okay, well, let me start us off. So today, I'm really grateful to have everybody here to talk about the Evidence in Governance and Politics Learning Days, which are workshops that our organization, EGAP, has been holding to strengthen research capacity in the Global South, with a focus on helping investigators based in the Global South learn about randomized field experiments. Now, this event is in English, pero todos aquí hablamos español con acentos muy diversos, pero estaremos muy felices de oír preguntas en español de cualquier acento que hablan ustedes. Now, I'm going to continue back in English, but again, everybody hopefully got that. You're fine to ask questions in Spanish if you'd like. Now, you might not have heard of EGAP, so I'm going to give you a little brief overview. EGAP is a network of social scientists and practitioners who want to address many questions. For example, they want to know about why democratic backsliding occurs, how to empower women, how to prevent violence at polling places, how to help cities and publics deal with and cope with climate change. How does community policing work as well as it should, or doesn't work as well as it should? We are a group of people who meet to improve each other's work across sectors. We're academics and practitioners, and crucially to connect between the academic and practice and between North and South. And since we want to foster North to South and South to South collaborations on research, we've been running these workshops because we want to strengthen capacity in the Global South. Now, let me introduce us. Can we go back one slide? And we'll introduce ourselves. So I'm the person who's been speaking, Jake Bowers. I'm a professor of political science and statistics at the University of Illinois. Right now, I am based in Uruguay. I'm sitting at the Universidad de la República right now. I'm an EGAP board member, and I've been lucky to be teaching in the Learning Days in Latin America since 2016 in Santiago de Chile, and then I'll be teaching in Medellin, Colombia in 2024. And I'll pass it off to Santiago for his introduction as well.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Santiago Tobón. I'm a professor of economics at Universidad de AFIT. I'm also the co-director of the Latin American regional hub of EGAP. I was a participant in the Learning Days in 2016 under Jake and others who taught me. And now I'm hosting at Universidad de AFIT the Learning Days this year here in Medellin. Natalia?
And Natalia?
Hello, everyone. I'm Natalia. I am an economist and a professional in government and public affairs from Universidad de los Andes, where I also hold a master's degree. Right now, I'm working as a consultant for the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. And I was a participant of the Learning Days in 2022.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ronnie Condor, and a Peruvian economist. I hold a master's degree in economics at the Universidad de San Andrés in Buenos Aires. Currently, I'm working as research assistant at LSE, and I was a participant at EGAP in 2022.
Thanks, everybody. So as you can see, I'm going to give Santiago and I are going to give a brief overview of EGAP and of Learning Days, and then this is a panel. And I hope that you can ask us questions. So as you see, we have people who've taught in Learning Days, people who have been students in Learning Days. And so we can talk a lot about these attempts at strengthening capacity and helping kind of like, help new investigators get more powerful as investigators. All right, so next slide. But first, let me just tell you briefly about the organization. As an organization, we're about 15 years old, I think. We do lots of things to foster the community of the network, because the point is to build communities of practice. Collaboration is always difficult. Collaborations between people who are academics and people who are working in government and people who work in one country and people who work in another country is difficult. So we spend a lot of time working on how to collaborate. We share ideas, we support each other. And out of this environment of sharing and idea creation, what's born this idea that we should create these workshops. So that's the idea that animates, that's the motivation for the Learning Days, is to sort of create new collaborators all around the world. So as you can see, we do many other things. For example, we do feedback sessions where a member of the organization says, hey, I need some help on a research design. Are these good ideas that I have? Please help me out. And a group of 12 people will gather on Zoom to talk about that. We've been writing guides like, what is a hypothesis test? Or how should implementers and talk with evaluators? We write policy briefs and we meet in person. Can we go to the next slide? So that's the kind of like overview of who we are. We currently have about 200 members. I think we're going to dramatically grow in the next year or so in terms of members. We have institutional members. So USAID has been a member of EGAP since almost the beginning and sends a representative or two representatives or more to EGAP meetings. So you can maybe talk with your colleagues who've been to the meetings about that. And as you see, we have people from all around the world who are members, and we have lots of these activities. In the next slide, I thought, Santiago, can you talk about this kind of aspect of things?
Yes, so EGAP organizes its members and activities into 4 thematic areas: crime reduction and police accountability, climate change governance, displacement, migration and integration, and democracy, conflict, and polarization. And the idea of these 4 thematic areas is for them to serve, bring EGAP members with other key outside stakeholders, such as, for instance, NGOs or governmental communities, to try to work around solving issues related across all these thematic areas. And as one example of that, one activity that we're doing, I'm also a co-chair at the Crime Reduction and Police Accountability thematic team. One of the activities that we've been doing within this thematic area is to develop a crime reduction lab in the city of Medellin, which is based in the city of Medellin, but with the idea of serving the whole country. And it has, for instance, 3 main activities that we've been working on during this year. One is evidence-based policy adoption workshops. So we're working with secretariats of security in Medellin, in Cali, in Barranquilla, and other cities to get their teams excited about impact evaluation, to learn about how to conduct randomized controlled trials, and to adopt these whenever they see it's possible, collaborating with us and other researchers as well. The second thing we're doing is creating a database and dashboard on citizen security that's useful for cities across the country to plan, for instance, their security strategies, to understand what's going on with the information they have, and so on. And we're working on specific impact evaluations to inform policy in the country. So that's the type of work that goes around these thematic areas. We also have meetings, for instance, where researchers that are affiliated with one of these areas meet with stakeholders. So for instance, last year we had a meeting at Cornell where we brought people from the police in Colombia and from the police in Brazil to talk to researchers about their challenges and to think about ideas and solutions building around impact evaluations and randomized controlled trials. We can go to the next slide. And then we have the regional hubs. So EGAP seeks to expand its capacity for global research, as Jake was mentioning at the beginning, through the establishment of these regional hubs. So currently we have, and under this model, EGAP's activities allow us for like locally rooted scholars to identify priorities, to set the research agenda, to share knowledge and foster collaboration across regions. And the two first, and some of the goals of these regional hubs are, for instance, to identify these local priorities, which means having people knowing stakeholders in the government or NGOs locally to do the kind of things that we're doing, mentioning in Medellin with the crime reduction lab, for instance, to foster this evidence-based research across relevant stakeholders, and to institutionalize regionally based events. So for instance, we have a regional meeting in Latin America. I'm going to turn to the 2 regional hubs that we have in the next slide. We have a regional meeting in Latin America where we will also want to just get together researchers from the region. So we have two regional hubs, as I was mentioning before. One in Latin America that was established in 2021. It's based at Universidad de los Andes, at the Centro de Estudios sobre Desarrollo Económico, and it's co-led by Leopoldo Ferguson, who's a professor of economics at Los Andes, and myself, who am based at Universidad de FIT, as I mentioned to you at the beginning. And we have the West Africa hub that was established in 2022, which is based at the Center for Research and Action for the Peace at the Université Jesuite in Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire. And it's led by Arsène Bryce Bado, who's based at SERAP. As was Jake mentioning at the beginning, we have a bunch of members, and these are the institutional members of the Latin American Regional Hub. So development banks as the IDB and CAF, IPA, which is an organization that we partner with a lot, that fosters also impact evaluations across the region, and other institutional members such as Mexico Evalúa, UNDP, and so on and so forth. The Learning Days workshops are, so as Jake was mentioning to do at the beginning, are these workshops that last typically 5 days. They're very intense, so it's like 8 hours per day, every day, bringing ideas of participants who when they apply to these programs, we submit a research proposal, an idea we want to work in. And then all the workshop is around the ideas of people. And we go around the methods, we go around how to improve the research designs, how to understand whether the research designs are well conducted or not. And we've had so far over 15 workshops. In Latin America, the first one was in 2016 in Santiago de Chile, the one I participated at. I actually brought a research design that was improved there. The paper came out published in 2021, and it's an impact evaluation of a randomized control trial of hotspots policing interventions that has been informing how policing is implemented here in Colombia, for instance. So I think this is a good example of how this process generally works. We are holding the 2024 meeting in Medellin in Universidad de FIT, as I mentioned before. We had 117 applicants. Today is my deadline for submitting the elected applicants. But as you can see, there's a lot of demand for these workshops because they're very useful. And this is going to be what the panel is about in the next moment of this session, where Ronnie, Natalia, and Jake, we're going to discuss like how are these Learning Days workshops important for us. So what's the content before we move to the panels? So first, like why randomize, which is important in the sense that it's not always obvious, and it's not always obvious, for instance, for counterparts in the government to understand why there needs to be a control group. I think the pandemic sort of helped us with that, like to explain how an experiment works. So why randomize, understand causal inference, randomization and hypothesis testing, understanding statistical power, why we need large samples, threats to validity, ethical considerations, which are always very important, design talks and clinics, and then we have group and individual feedback because everyone brings their own projects, and at the end, everyone presents their own projects as well. All right, so now we're moving to this panel discussion. I'm going to be moderating the session, so I'm going to be formulating questions for Ronnie, for Natalia, and for Jake. I'm going to start with Natalia and Ronnie with one broad question. You also have a couple of slides, so you can use them as you see fit. And the idea is for everyone who's connected to send us the questions. We're going to be collecting questions in the Q&A or in the chat. And so we'll start with some questions that we prepared for the team, for the panelists, but please be free to just submit your questions as well. So I'm going to ask our panelists to be concise, like 1 to 2 minutes at most, so that we can have time for more questions and time for questions from the public as well. So I'm going to start with Natalia and then Ronnie. This is the same question for you, for both of you guys. So what motivated you to participate in the Learning Days workshops, and what were your expectations going to the program, how this worked out in the end? So Natalia first.
Okay. Hello. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I was motivated to participate in the Learning Days based mainly in 3 reasons. The first one is what because I was interested in public policies implementation and evaluation. And the second one is because I believe that it is very, really important to understand experimental research methods. And my expectations were to understand deeply everything related to randomized interventions. And I believe that the learning days were beyond my expectations. Yes.
Thank you, Natalia. Ronnie?
Yeah, well, I applied for the Learning Days because, well, I have a friend who was a previous participant in the Learning Days. I didn't remember the year exactly, but he told me about this experience. He was working in the Ministry of Education in Peru in randomized evaluations. So I have like the same interest. So I applied for the Learning Days with the expectations to learn more knowledge about impact evaluation, also in the statistical theory, but also in the practical sessions. So I think it was very important for me, and also to know more people, researchers that are working in different research projects in different topics. When I came to Bogota, because I'm Peruvian, I met people that are working in educational projects, in projects about crime, violence, and politics. So it was a fantastic experience.
I wanted to add something that Ronnie just highlighted, that is the practice that you have in these learning days. It's not just like the theoretical part. You have like the opportunity to take your project into practice, and I think this is like a very valuable experience that you acquired here in the learning days.
Great, thanks. One question, Jake, for you, which is like, what strategies, because you've been teaching in the learning days for quite a while, I think every year, maybe, I don't know. Like, what strategies do you use to ensure that participants leave the learning days with workshops with a comprehensive understanding of experimental research? Like, which are the challenges there?
I think the challenge is that people come in with very diverse backgrounds in regards to statistics. And of course, the experimental design uses statistics to help us justify our choices. Like, why should I give you a budget for 200 people or 1,000 people? Why would you randomize this way or that way? So you need to use statistics is what helps us make those decisions. And people come in with really different backgrounds of statistics. So we really do our best. We do a couple of different strategies. We have kind of mini lectures. We have quizzes each day that at the beginning of each day that ask people to remember what they just did. And oftentimes we allow those quizzes to go on and on and on, even if it's like what is statistical power? No, it's not a superpower like Superman. And so because we have the whole day together, we can be flexible and have broad conversations to go back over content. I think the other tactic that I think is really powerful in the learning days that I haven't seen really in any other pedagogical environment has been the one-on-one conversations. So one aspect of these learning days is that we have 15 or 20 students or participants, and then we have 5 or 6 instructors. It's not one instructor. And so each participant can sit next to one of the instructors and ask specific questions, maybe that they were nervous to ask, or they were particular to their own design. And so those are our hope, is that this enables this kind of really tailored experience to help people answer their questions.
Great. One question for Ronnie and Natalia. Maybe now, Ronnie, you can start. Which is like, you briefly went over this, but how have you incorporated the knowledge and skills that you gained in the workshops into your work and into your prospects for the future as well?
Well, of course, that learning days improve my technical skills At that moment, I was working at IPA. You mentioned it, that this is a partner organization of EGAP. So usually my work at IPA was field data collection. But after the knowledge and the technical skills I gained at the learning days, I have like new responsibilities. And also I was promoted in at IPA. And my new tasks at that organization was more like the experimental design. I did some randomizations and some power calculations and other things that I learned at the EGAP Learning Days. So that's the way I incorporate this knowledge in my work experience. And additionally, one important aspect about this learning days, more than the technical skills, was to be involved in a research environment, because the instructors share with us their working papers, and I learn a lot in the conversation with the structures and how to formulate a good research proposal, for example. And I incorporate this in my work, because at that moment I was also working with a Peruvian NGO called Yachayhuasi, and we write a research proposal to call for funding. So it was very nice for me.
Great. Natalia?
Yes, well, I've been working evaluating public policy since I was a participant of the Learning Days. At that time, I was working at the National Public Procurement Agency in a project whose objective was to introduce small rural businesses into the system, in the procurement system in Colombia. And that was my final work at the Learning Days. And I had the opportunity to share like my ideas and experience with the professors and my classmates. As I said, I've been working on the evaluation of public policies, also at the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, and also at the Secretary of Economic Development in Bogota. I think that the Learning Days like give me the essential skills to implement effective policies, and also to know how to evaluate the policies. And also, I believe that this was an opportunity for me to engage in complementary courses to enrich my learning. For example, I was a participant last year of the multidimensional measurement of poverty given by the University of Oxford. And I think I could like integrate like the visions that I learned in EGAP, and also the lessons that I learned in Oxford, in order to like to think in public policies that could implement both like randomization and that could reduce poverty in the future.
Great. I'm going to elaborate on that a bit. I told you before, when I was at the Learning Days in 2016, I brought this project, which was an impact evaluation. It was a randomized control trial of a hotspots policing intervention that was going to be conducted in Bogota. And something that I learned a lot in the Learning Days was like, you learn to figure out the challenges of randomized control trials, because like the original idea of randomized control trials is mostly around just randomization. So you might think that only assigning treatment and control groups randomly, that solves the problem. But in our case, this was a very complex experiment because streets are interconnected. So you randomize to treatment and control groups streets, and then you're going to have many challenges, such as spillovers and things like that. So the Learning Days actually are at least for what I saw there and for what we're doing this year and for what I've seen in the curriculum, is very advanced. This is not basic teaching of impact evaluation or randomized control trials. This is very advanced. It's very well thought, which makes it great, and you learn, and it's very useful. And so at the end of the day, that was in my case, that was a great experience as well. Jake, I'm now going to turn over to you. I saw you sent the Learning Days textbook. So I think there's a lot of materials from the Learning Days. Maybe you can elaborate on which are those materials, how can people access them, and what's there?
Great, sure. So I put a link in. We have two of the previous Learning Days instructors and organizers, Martin Boers, who's an development economist from the Netherlands, and Naomi Achino, who's a political scientist in the US. And I decided that we would write a textbook in order to help people run their own learning days, basically, and also to kind of to have a memory of everything that everybody has been producing for these learning days, and also to kind of help organize the content, so it's a lot easier for an instructor to create a lecture about the learning days. It's turned out to be of use very broadly because students like to see all the different lectures and all the different code and all the different links to readings. We also got grants to have it be translated. We had really interesting debates about how we should translate certain statistical terms. It turns out that, my Spanish is from Chile and the Spanish from Colombia is very different. And, causal inference, etc. We had to have debates about it. But it turns out to have been quite useful, I think, that even if we're speaking in English, to sort of reach everybody, not prevent anybody from, learning because of language barriers. And I think that has been a major effect of the book, I think, in particular, because now we have materials that everybody can access. The book is open source, so it's online. You can click on that link. You can contribute to the book because it's open source. It's sort of, we're currently constantly under development. My friend Naomi is one of the two methods and trainings directors of EGAP, and she's been really focusing on the Learning Days in Africa. And it turns out that the Learning Days in Africa seem to have a slightly different structure, pedagogical structure, than the Learning Days in Latin America. So we're having active discussions about how to reorganize the content there. But anybody can use these materials for any reason. Over the years, the people who have contributed their slides, so EGAP members, come to be the instructors. They travel around the world. So, Rosario Aguilar comes from the University of Newcastle in far northern England to Latin American Learning Days. I come from Illinois. Martin Boers comes from the Netherlands, and we all volunteer to do this work. And so in a way, it's like a labor of love where everybody gives, and we hope that everybody benefits and actually contributes back as we move forward. Did I miss something, Santiago?
No, I think that's great. Maybe just a follow-up, because there's a question from the public on how do you do this, like individual consultations work during the you mentioned during the Learning Days. So maybe you can elaborate a bit on that. How is that structured? Yeah,
so we actually have time. I don't know if in the Learning Days book, but in the agenda for the 5 days, we make time for individual meetings at the end of each day. We have quizzes at the beginning of each day, which should be fun, as I said, and everybody talks together. Then we have some presentations about, how do I calculate statistical power? How the heck might I design a study if people on one street might give the treatment to people on another street? And then we just work that time in. Also, everybody is there to have kind of an intense, almost like camp-like experience. So instructors also have office hours at 6 p.m. After the day is done. So really, it's a very tiring event for everyone and of course the students are all meeting each other from all over the region and are working on their own presentation. So you're in a group of people who are all working for a week to learn and understand, or from my side, quickly come up with a presentation on statistical power because we all agree it needs to be fixed for tomorrow, something like that. Yeah.
For Ronnie and Natalia, one question is about during the learning days. Do you want to tell us like how did you went over that, go over that, like what Jake is saying about like the structure of the classes, like your reaction as a student? How do you enjoy that? How did you which were the strengths, for instance, of the structure of the course and so on?
Yeah, sure. Well, I didn't mention it previously, but the learning days are intense days. So this workshop, well, I think that for the last day, I think I didn't sleep to prepare my slides for the presentation. Because we have classes all the day, and at 6 p.m. I guess we have
Yes.
this time for questions to the instructions. So well, but it was a good experience because all the participants are involved in the same, are working in their projects. We have maybe with other participants like similar projects, so we collaborate. It was a good environment, really.
Yes, like Ronnie said, it was like an intense week. We woke up like at 7 a.m. and end the day at 7 p.m. and then like go to have dinner and then continue to study and work on your presentation because we had to present this the last day of the learning days. But I think it was like I think like the practice part of the learning days is invaluable because you have the opportunity to work on your personal project, and you are exposed to bring all this theory to the real world. And the good thing is that you have by your side the teachers to help you and also your classmates. And also it was very nice to meet people from around Latin America that like share your passions, your yes.
Great. Yeah, so as Jake mentions, we're not trying to prevent participants from sleeping, but it's definitely not vacations. It's definitely a lot of work.
Right.
Jake, one question that's related to your last point there is how do we ensure like diversity and accessibility in these workshops? And I think that links to your point there, but maybe you can discuss more.
Yeah. Well, so we raise money, and all of the participants, all of the participants come for free from across the region. I think we tend to have extra participants that are local, that are we don't have to pay for hotel rooms and flights, so we have kind of a combination, and that's one reason why it's good that it rotates. So when we did it in Mexico City, we had extra people from Mexico as well as people flying from Uruguay, and when we did it in Chile, we had more Chileans, etc. And then there's a selection process. So we have 117 people that both Santiago and I have to finish going over, and we have a rubric. One thing I've learned about ensuring that you have equitable and diverse and inclusive selection procedures is that rubrics really, really help. So we have multiple people on the selection committee. So each candidate is looked over by more than one person, and we are all using rubrics in order to sort of standardize our kind of or also just kind of engage with our own maybe implicit biases when we try to make these judgments. And then of course we try for explicit, almost quota-like admissions by gender, for example, would be one thing that we want to make sure that we're not that's something we want to really, I think, strongly control. So, and I think we've been successful so far.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. Ronnie and Natalia, do you want to discuss, for instance, the project that you brought? Like, because just questions about like what type of projects have come out of these workshops. I've discussed this hotspots policing idea, but maybe you guys can just briefly discuss like maybe your project or others that you saw, so that people gets a sense of the type of projects that are like worked around the workshops?
Well, at that moment, I was working at the National Public Procurement Agency here in Colombia. And the idea was to incorporate rural businesses in the public procurement system. So I was working in that, like, how can we create a public policy that we can evaluate if it is going to be effective, like to motivate rural businesses to be part of the public procurement system here in Colombia. And that was what I was working on the learning days. But I remembered we had some classmates that were working on that time at, for example, the World Food Program. And I don't remember. I don't know, Ronnie, if you can remember.
Well, to talk about the research project that I applied to the Learning Days, it was about education, and it was online tutoring. In fact, it was a real project that was working on a small scale in some rural areas of Peru. And I have the contacts of that organization, that NGO. And well, I thought with some friends in that NGO and talking about how to escalate this project. So my research proposal for the Learning Days was a proposal. Well, in theory, we have funding to escalate the project and estimate the impact, the causal effect of that treatment of online tutoring in rural areas of Peru. Of course, in the Learning Days, I see some logistic problems of the project, some problems in the implementation, but the instructor give us like some pieces of advice to improve this research proposal.
Great, thanks. There's a great question in the chat, and I'm not sure whether everyone is looking at that, so I'm going to ask you that question. Jake, you have already provided some answers, which is, how do you balance theory, higher level information, and the in-depth statistical procedures and coding practices? Because, and this is the person speaking, in their experience, this is especially difficult when participants are all coming with varying levels of experience. Even different coding experiences are Stata, SPSS. So how do you manage that? And I think, Jake, you're the best to answer that.
Sure. Well, it's difficult. First of all, it's a great question because, you know, everybody is like, it's incredible diverse, the backgrounds. I've never taught in the African Learning Days, and I gather that the diversity is even broader there. Whereas in the Latin American Learning Days, it's almost all people with, you know, who have graduated from a university and have master's degrees, are pursuing PhDs, have PhDs, or are actually working, etc., and have access to technology, for example, and like internet, etc. One thing that we decided to do was to try to do everything using free and open source tools wherever we could. Again, because here we are going to the global south, so we just use R. We don't use Stata or SPSS. Now, of course, that means that it's a barrier to people who know other languages. For people who don't know other languages, it's just there's no additional barrier. We really have worked hard to make the slides and the presentations and the materials easy for everyone. And the other thing that we do is this individualized, you know, meeting. So the faculty, the instructors are all professors at different universities around the world who come, and these professors have taught these courses. So Naomi Achino teaches a field experiments course at Emory University every year. I teach statistics for doctoral students at the University of Illinois every year. So, you know, we are experienced teachers of these things. We also almost always try to have one, if not two, graduate students who are experts in R, who are ideally native speakers of the language of either Spanish or French in the room. And it turns out those people perhaps work harder than anybody else because everybody, A, they're not intimidating because they're not already a professor, and B, they're often nicer than everybody, and C, they're native Spanish speakers or native French speakers. And so everyone goes to talk to the graduate students and says, help me, my R code is giving me errors. And then the person helps them one at a time, basically. And so that's another of our, really this idea that you have 5 or 6 instructors in a class for 20 people, it's an incredible student-teacher ratio. But it is in fact really necessary given this kind of diversity that we have, and given how far and fast we want to go with statistical foundations. Like we really try not to use rules of thumb. We're trying, the world right now is not the world of reading off of statistical tables at the back of the textbook. It's a very archaic idea. So we're really trying to say, like, what is a p-value? How would we understand what a p-value is, which is actually pretty deep and quite advanced, as Santiago was saying. So we'd like, because if we can give people that power, then they can go forward and do way more flexible, way more powerful work. But we need a lot of faculty to do that.
Exactly. And actually it requires a lot of preparation. So as Jake was mentioning, there's always a teacher assistant in the room who is typically a PhD student. In this case, for instance, going to be a PhD student who's very well advanced, that's based in Universidad de AFIT. He's a student of the PhD in economics in AFIT. And we've been working with him since more than a month ago in preparing all the materials. Even though the Learning Days workshop in Medellin is going to happen in August. So it requires a lot of preparation for the team to address like all these and to prepare to receive the students and so on. One question, Ronnie and Natalia, for you guys, because you've roughly elaborated on this, but can you discuss like any collaborations or partnerships that have emerged as a result of these workshops? Like in your experience, like Natalia, you're mentioning before, like where you work now or where you work now, Ronnie, like how can like the experience of the Learning Days be useful in developing these like collaborations? Hard question.
Okay. Well, I don't know if it's a real collaboration, but well, previous to the workshop, I knew the research work of the Professor Juan Vargas and Julia Sater, and it was amazing to hear them, and they're presenting their work. So in the Learning Days, we have like a long conversations talking about suggestions. They give us also some advice for our professional careers. That I think it was very, very useful for junior researchers as me at that moment.
Thanks.
Well,
Natalia,
I think I took your question more like if we like could extend our work and get funding from others, right? Or
Yeah,
what
like
was
what
the
type
question?
of collaboration? Like in your like after the Learning Days, you're working in some way in topics related to impact evaluation. What type of collaborations have happened, like with maybe government agencies, maybe the example that you mentioned about
Okay, yes. I've been working with related to public policies, implementation and evaluation with the National Public Procurement Agency, as I said, with the introducing small rural businesses to the system. Also, I've been working at the Secretary of Economic Development in different programs related to employment, public policies that help to reduce disemployment in Bogota. Also in public policies related to give some benefits to enterprises here in Bogota, and in other things like more bigger at the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, for example, in the construction of schools, in the construction of roads. And I believe that the things that I have learned at the Learning Days have helped me to understand deeply all the public policies and also how to evaluate them effectively.
Great,
That I think
thanks.
that is like the best.
Perfect. One question for you, Jake, that's also in the chat, and you're already responding to that, which is very interesting, which is about like, how does the demand for the Learning Days work? Like whether this is purely academic or there's also demand from like people from the communities of practice and the government, and how does it work, and how do we and you yourself as an instructor like work around this heterogeneity in backgrounds and interests?
I think, yeah, so I don't have the data on hand, but in all the Latin American Learning Days, I have a feeling like a third to a half of the people in the room already have a position or are working they're working in a think tank, they're working or with an associated policy organization like IPA, or are working in the Ministry of Health in La Paz in Bolivia, or something like this. Like this is like, or like Ronnie was saying, like this education, there's an education intervention that's already going on. So on the one hand, we're admitting those people and we're actively seeking them out. They tend to be younger people who want to kind of learn the skills, and maybe they're also interested in pursuing other degree programs at the same time. It would be fabulous to have more people at higher levels, for example, who are maybe contracting for evaluation work, who are making decisions using evaluation work. We've actually been having active discussions about, designing a different form of training where you don't have to spend all your time seeing errors from the R programming language, but can like think hard about causal inference if you are higher level, right? We haven't done that yet, but we've been kind of dreaming about that. I can also say that the materials that we've created have been used elsewhere. So part of my job, half of my time is paid for by the General Services Administration of the US government. And I work for a group called the Office of Evaluation Sciences there. And we put on trainings about these kinds of topics for federal employees who are interested in doing mostly domestic evaluations, but sometimes international evaluations. So we often are using very similar slide decks that we created for Bogota. But there are EGAP members. For example, the director of the OES is an organization that's a part of EGAP, and the director of the OES, Kelly Bidwell, is an active member of EGAP. So multiple of us, there's kind of flow back and forth really between actual being in government and these trainings as well. Hopefully that helps, but we'd like to do more work with governments for sure, and governmental employees.
Exactly. Yeah, and actually, like what I described before about this crime reduction lab that we are setting up here in Colombia, it's a lot, and which is supported by EGAP. And I know that there's other EGAP members that do this type of work that we're doing. We're also training people in the government in not only in randomized control trials, but also in impact evaluation, in data analysis, so that they are more open to conducting randomized control trials, so that they're able to evaluate programs that they're implementing, so that they are better informed to, for instance, reach out to researchers about conducting like ambitious randomized control trials. So I think there's a lot of that kind of work going on. We also, I mentioned to you before, the meetings that happen for the thematic areas, such as crime reduction, the meetings that happen at the regional hubs. And typically there's also practitioners there. And we want to connect like researchers with practitioners so that people is interested into incorporating evidence-based and evidence-based policies and impact evaluations into their agenda. I have one question for all three of you, Ronnie, Natalia, and Jake, which is like, from your perspective, how can or can you elaborate on how the Learning Days workshops address the needs and challenges of research in the Global South? Just an open, easy question for you guys.
How about I'll go first, so I'm willing to talk. So, there are many challenges to research everywhere, and especially policy relevant research, whether it's in the Global South or not. The benefits of the kinds of things that I see that the Learning Days create, however, they help create communities of practice across the region. So, for example, if you're trying to do something, for example, state publicly how you're going to do your analyses before you do your analyses, which might make people worried about transparency. The communications team at the city might say, wait, you can't say what you're going to do. You say, look, other people have done it. Here, my friend in Lima, my friend in Bogota, my friend in Mexico City, my friend in Concepcion, Chile, they've all done this, and nothing bad has happened. Or you ask those people who you stayed up all night with, although I hope not everybody stays up all night, like Ronnie. But you ask those people and you say, well, what did you do? Like, I'm getting pushback. They're saying I can't publish my result because the result shows nothing worked. But I'm saying the fact that we found that nothing worked, it means that we can now think harder about why things didn't work. Let's go do some interviews. Let's go find out why things didn't work. They think it's embarrassing, but I think it's really a really great piece of learning that we need to share. And again, this community of practice helps you. I think some of these techniques, these ideas about research integrity, are actual modules in the course itself. So there's a lot of discussion of ethics. There's a lot of discussion of research integrity and transparency. So those sorts of things, I think also help. But I'll stop there. Natalia or Ronnie?
Well, the Learning Days really help us to understand how evidence works for policy. It was very important for us because most of the participants coming from policy agencies in government, other from ministries, another for academia. But I think it is important for policy to understand how the interventions can reduce crime, improve education, reduce poverty, and other outcomes. Because we spend a lot of time on the experimental design. I saw some previous question how to balance all the materials of the workshop, and I want to respond that also. Is that all the Learning Days we focus on the research proposal, on the project. So probably we didn't understand all the equations for the power calculation, but we understand essentially how it works for policy, for a specific intervention. So this is very important also for academia and for policy. And in our final presentation of our projects, we focused like 5 minutes discussing all the threats of the experimental design. Maybe if the treatment could not work in that place, how it can be solved. So everybody in the audience gives some suggestions for that, and it was a good experience, I think.
Yes, when we were presenting, we had like 5 minutes of feedback and questions from the teachers and the participants. And I believe like due like to everybody is like very into the learning days and the randomization. Everyone is like so participate and for example, for me, the learning days helped me to understand deeply the theory of field experiments, like why to randomize, the causal inference. I had previous knowledge, but I believe like the learning days like went beyond like the things that I had in my mind. And also the opportunity to share my ideas with my classmates and my teachers helped me to like to construct this knowledge and the skills from the workshops.
Thank you. So I'm going to just like summarize with two highlight to a couple of things out of this conversation, and then thank everyone for participating. I think so. Most of the research in like conducting randomized control trials and impact evaluations of public policies come from the global north. And this is common for many subjects. Like, for instance, I specialize in crime. Most of the research on, for instance, policing strategies come from the US, Australia, or the UK. And commonly, police departments here in the region try to just bring these ideas and import them and just implement them as they are. But if we think about like crime is very different in Latin America, for instance, than it is in the UK. On both sides of the problem, like the crime is much more complex, so there's more organized crime, for instance, here. But on the other hand, institutional capacity is lower. There's fewer data, there's fewer training for police officers, and so on. So I think it's imperative to just try to build our own interventions, build our own evidence of what works and what doesn't work. And I think that what the learning days have been pushing forward is to have more capacity to do that. Because in the region, we also have, like in general, in most countries, like a well trained bureaucracy. People understand many subjects, think thoughtfully about policy problems. And this has been strengthened by USAID work in the region. And I know, because I know it directly here in Colombia, where there's a lot of USAID presence. We actually work at Universidad de AFIT with some USAID programs where we conduct impact evaluations of programs that you are implementing or that we help you implement in the region. And with all this information, I think we can, the Latin America is sort of a perfect laboratory to foster this evidence building effort. And I think that the learning days, and I speak as not only as an EGAP member, but now as a former learning days participant, I think that's a massive effort, and we like to think of that like that. And we want to welcome USAID, your teams, to participate in the learning days in the coming years. So we'll leave it there. I want to express my gratitude to Jake and Ronnie and Natalia for being here with me in this panel. And thanks very much to USAID, to your teams, to Morgan Holmes, who I know who's here as well, because of providing us this space for doing this. I know that USAID, and again, because of our connections with USAID here in Colombia, you care a lot about impact evaluation and about evidence based policies being implemented. So it's great that you had this space for us, and we're very thankful at EGAP for having us here. If you have any other further questions, I'm going to leave you the email of the Latin American Hub at the chat. Please feel free to reach out to that email or to any of the panelists here. I know Jake or myself would be very happy to respond to any additional question. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I hope you found the space useful. Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Jay.